It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. The church bells of St. Mark's Parish, a quiet little brick chapel in Henderson, Kentucky, rang beneath a cloudless spring sky. The pews were filled with friends, family, and the faint scent of lilies drifting through the air. The groom, Daniel Harper, stood nervously at the altar, smoothing his jacket, trying not to cry. The bride, Emily Ross, walked slowly down the aisle, radiant in white, clutching her bouquet with trembling hands, and beside them stood Father Raymond Doyle, a man whose gentle voice had baptized half the children in that parish, whose homilies spoke not of punishment, but of mercy. He had been their priest for over 30 years. To many, he was more like a father than a pastor. The choir began to sing softly. Laughter and whispers filled the aisles. Everything was perfect until the church door creaked open. A man entered, alone. Tall, broad shoulders, wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. No one paid him much attention at first. Weddings drew guests from far and wide, and strangers weren't unusual. But what came next would scar the parish forever. As the couple began to exchange vows, Father Raymond raised his hands, blessing them under the statue of the Virgin Mary that towered behind the altar. Our Lady of Grace, her eyes cast downward in serene compassion. That was when it happened. A single shot, sharp, deafening. The sound tore through the sanctuary like a bolt of lightning. Emily screamed. Daniel froze. The choir fell silent, and Father Raymond staggered backward, his eyes wide, hand pressed to his chest, before collapsing to the marble floor. For a moment the world stopped. The gun clattered to the ground. The shooter turned and ran, disappearing out the back door before anyone could react. Then chaos erupted. People screamed, ducked under pews, rushed forward. Daniel knelt beside the priest, blood spreading across the white vestments. Someone shouted for help. Another yelled to call 911. And amid the panic, one elderly woman, Mrs. Gallagher, the sacristan, gasped and pointed toward the altar. "The statue!" she cried. "The Virgin's face! She's turning!" At first no one understood, but when Daniel looked up through tears and disbelief, he saw it too. The statue of Our Lady, which had always faced the center of the church, now seemed to have turned slightly toward the back, toward the door where the shooter had fled. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked frantically, but Father Raymond's pulse was fading. His last words were barely audible. "Forgiven him." Then he went still. The church fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sobbing of the bride. Outside, sirens wailed. Police cordoned off the area. Reporters began to gather, and within an hour, the tragedy was everywhere. Priest shot during wedding in Kentucky. But inside the church, something strange lingered. An unexplainable chill in the air, a faint scent of roses, and a quiet unease that no one could name. Later that night, when the candles were extinguished and the police tape sealed the doors, Mrs. Gallagher returned briefly to retrieve the Blessed Sacrament. She swore that as she passed the statue of the Virgin, she heard a whisper, faint, almost like breath. "He will be found." She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But she crossed herself, knelt before the statue, and wept, because she knew Father Raymond. He had been the kind of priest who stayed after Mass to talk to the lonely, who visited hospitals on Christmas Eve, who once sold his own car to pay for a widow's rent. For him to die like that and during a wedding felt not only cruel, but almost blasphemous. Yet deep inside, even amid the grief, a strange conviction began to grow among the faithful. This was not the end of the story. Something, or someone, would not let the truth remain hidden. And before the week was over, the statue of Our Lady would weep and point to the face of a murderer. The gunshot still echoed in people's ears long after Father Raymond's body was carried away. Police swarmed the small church, their radios crackling, flashlights cutting through the dim light of the stained glass windows. Yellow tape crossed the entrance, and the sacred silence of St. Mark's was replaced by the hum of investigation and grief. Emily and Daniel sat in the back of an ambulance, her wedding dress stained red, his hands shaking as he tried to wipe blood from his ring. Reporters had already arrived, shouting questions no one could answer. The headline was being typed before the crime scene was even cleared. Priest murdered at Kentucky wedding. Killer still at large. Inside, parishioners refused to leave. They stood frozen, clutching rosaries, whispering prayers through tears. One man, a deacon who had served beside Father Raymond for 20 years, stared at the altar and muttered, "He died giving a blessing. He died as he lived." But the strangest reaction came from Mrs. Gallagher, the elderly sacristan who had been the first to cry out about the statue. She kept looking at Our Lady's image, her lips trembling. "I swear she's not facing the same way," she told the police. "She used to look straight ahead. Now she's turned, just a little, toward the back." An officer brushed her off, saying it was just her imagination. But a few others noticed it too, a subtle shift. And on the marble below, where the statue stood, tiny droplets glistened under the crime scene lights, as if condensation had formed on her face, or tears. That night, when the news reached homes across Kentucky, people lit candles and prayed. Some believed it was a random act of violence. Others whispered that it was something darker or divine. And as the police worked through the night searching for the gunman, one question echoed in every heart. Why would anyone kill a priest in front of Our Lady? Detective Ethan Morales arrived at St. Mark's before dawn. The church still smelled of candle wax and gunpowder. Rain had started to fall, tapping softly on the police tape that fluttered in the wind. Inside, technicians photographed every inch of the marble floor. A single bullet casing glimmered near the first pew, small, ordinary, and devastating. Morales had seen death before, too many times, but this one was different. A priest, shot during a wedding, in front of the Virgin Mary. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was sacrilege. He flipped through his notebook as an officer briefed him. No prints, no eyewitnesses. Shooter was male, tall, gray jacket, cap, fled on foot through the rear garden. Cameras inside were down, power outage 2 hours before the ceremony. 2 hours? Morales asked. Coincidence? Maybe. Or planned. He walked slowly toward the altar. Blood had been cleaned, but faint traces remained. Dark stains in the cracks of the marble. Above it stood the statue of Our Lady, hands open, expression unchanged. Yet something about her presence felt alive. The detective couldn't explain it. He noticed a small bouquet of white roses lying at the statue's feet, slightly wilted, one petal stained red. "Who left these?" he asked. "Bride's family," replied the officer. "They said Father Raymond placed them himself, right before the wedding. He called them flowers of forgiveness." Morales scribbled the phrase down, but his eyes lingered on the statue. For a second, just a fraction of a breath, he thought he saw moisture glinting on the Virgin's cheek. He blinked. Nothing, just marble, cold and perfect. Still, unease settled in his chest. Outside, a reporter shouted questions, cameras flashing as the hearse rolled away with the priest's body. The headline would dominate the news for days, but Morales wasn't thinking about fame or politics. He was thinking about his daughter, how he used to bring her to church before she died, how he'd stopped believing in anything after that. Now, standing in front of a statue that seemed to weep for a dead priest, he whispered under his breath, "Don't do this to me again." He closed his notebook, exhaled, and made a quiet promise. He would find whoever did this, no matter what it cost him. 2 days after the shooting, the church remained sealed. Detective Morales returned with a forensic team to collect final samples before the place could reopen for prayer. The morning sun streamed weakly through the stained glass, casting red and gold light across the empty pews. Near the altar, Mrs. Gallagher, the elderly sacristan, waited quietly. She had the keys, and she carried herself with that trembling mix of reverence and fear, the kind of fear that only comes when one has seen something holy. "Detective," she said softly, "there's something you should see." She led him to the statue of the Virgin Mary. At first glance it looked as it always had, hands outstretched, eyes lowered. But on the white marble of her cheeks faint streaks ran downward, thin, translucent lines that shimmered in the light. Morales frowned. "Rainwater? Impossible," she whispered. "It hasn't rained inside St. Mark's for 100 years." He called the forensic techs over. They carefully swabbed the residue and sealed it in vials. One of them, a young woman named Harper, tried to brush it off as humidity. But when she lifted her glove, her expression changed. It's oily, like tears. Later that day, the lab results came back. The fluid wasn't condensation, paint, or cleaning solvent. It was water containing trace amounts of sodium chloride, the same chemical balance as human tears. Morales stared at the report for a long time. He didn't tell the press. He didn't even tell his captain. But the news spread anyway, leaked by someone on the forensic team. By nightfall, hundreds of people stood outside St. Mark's with candles, praying and crying. Some claimed they saw the statue move, ever so slightly, turning her gaze toward the back of the church, the same direction the shooter had fled. Morales refused to believe it. He told himself it was just grief, just hysteria. But as he stood in that silent church alone, the smell of roses filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. One single chime, though no one had touched it. He left without looking back, because deep down he was afraid that if he did, he'd see her eyes looking right at him. The deeper Detective Morales dug, the stranger the story became. Father Raymond Doyle wasn't just a small-town priest. Decades earlier, he had served as a military chaplain in Iraq, stationed with the 82nd Airborne during one of the bloodiest years of the war. In old photos, Morales saw him younger, smiling among soldiers, holding a rosary instead of a rifle. But buried inside that same personnel file was something else, a formal complaint, unsigned, dated 2008. The letter accused Chaplain Doyle of betraying his unit by refusing to bless a retaliatory mission after a bombing that killed 6 Americans. He had preached forgiveness instead of vengeance. The soldiers went anyway, and most never came back. One survivor, Corporal Travis Miller, had written to the Military Inquiry Board, "He made us pray instead of act. Because of him, my brothers died. I'll never forgive that man." Morales traced Miller's name through public records. The man had been discharged, moved across several states, and vanished into the folds of rural Kentucky. No criminal record, no social media, no steady job. Just silence. Then a detail struck him. Miller had last lived 15 miles from Henderson, near an abandoned farm. It was too close to ignore. Morales drove there alone. The wind pushed across empty fields, carrying the smell of burnt grass and rust. The house was falling apart, windows broken, mail piled high. On the wall of the living room hung a single faded photo, a group of soldiers kneeling with Father Raymond at the center. Someone had scratched a red X across the priest's face. Beneath it lay a small wooden box. Inside, Morales found 2 objects, a tarnished dog tag and a handwritten note. Forgive him? Never. The detective's stomach tightened. He took a deep breath, looked around the silent house, and muttered, "Lord, what have I walked into?" That night, as he typed his report, Morales couldn't shake the memory of the statue's tears or the feeling that the Virgin's gaze had been leading him exactly here. A week after the shooting, Detective Morales began interviewing every guest who had attended the wedding. Most had heard the gunshot, seen the chaos, but nothing more, their memories blurred by fear. But 2 testimonies stood out, one from a child, one from a woman. The first came from Eli Thompson, 8 years old, who had served as the altar boy that day. He sat on a bench outside the rectory, feet dangling, clutching a rosary his grandmother had given him. Morales spoke gently. "Eli, you were standing closest to Father Raymond, right?" The boy nodded. His eyes were wide but steady. When the man came in, I saw Father look up at the statue. He smiled. And then he said something. What did he say? Eli frowned, thinking hard. He said, "She's here." Morales blinked. "Who's she?" "The lady," Eli whispered. "The one in blue. Our lady." He wasn't scared at all. He looked happy. The detective wrote it down, though his hand trembled slightly. Later that afternoon he visited Karen Bloom, a middle-aged woman who had been sitting in the third pew during the wedding. She'd fainted after the shooting and was still shaken. She told him something she'd never said to anyone else. "When the shot went off," she said, voice trembling, "I covered my face. I thought I was going to die. But then I heard a voice." "A voice?" Morales asked. "Yes, a woman's voice, soft, but right next to me. She said, 'Forgive him.' I swear to you, detective, it wasn't anyone in the pews. It came from the altar." Morales sat back, silent. His rational mind screamed coincidence, trauma, hallucination. But something deeper inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. That night, alone in his car outside the church, he replayed the child's words again and again. "She's here." And for the first time since his daughter's death, Ethan Morales found himself whispering a prayer, not for the killer, not even for the priest, but for understanding. He didn't know it yet, but heaven was already answering. 3 days after Father Raymond's funeral, the doors of St. Mark's Church reopened for prayer. The pews were filled again, this time not with wedding guests, but with mourners. Candles flickered along the aisles. The scent of wax mixed with something faintly sweet, like roses after rain. It began quietly. A few parishioners kneeling before the tabernacle noticed the air growing warm, almost radiant. Then came the fragrance, stronger now, sweeping through the entire church. People looked around, whispering. There were no flowers inside, no air fresheners, nothing to explain it. Mrs. Gallagher gasped first. She pointed toward the statue of the Virgin Mary, still standing behind the altar, still bearing faint traces of the mysterious tears. A ray of sunlight broke through a stained glass window and landed squarely on her face. Bright, unwavering, almost alive. The light shimmered, and for a few seconds her marble features seemed to soften. Her lips curved, her gaze glowed with warmth. Someone in the back cried out, "She's shining!" Phones lifted, cameras clicked. Within hours, photos and short videos flooded social media. Our Lady of Henderson trended across the state. Some claimed to see the statue move, others swore they saw her eyes glisten again. Detective Morales arrived that evening, expecting chaos. What he found was reverence, dozens of people praying, hands clasped, whispering, "Our Lady is revealing the truth." He wanted to dismiss it all, but as he stood near the altar, the scent of roses surrounded him, vivid, unmistakable. And when he looked up at the Virgin's face, he could have sworn her gaze wasn't toward heaven anymore, but slightly downward, toward the nave, the very place the shooter had stood. He left the church that night with one thought echoing in his mind. If this was madness, then why did it feel so peaceful? 2 days after the so-called miracle, Detective Morales received a call from the state forensics lab. They'd finally finished analyzing the surveillance footage from the nearby streets. At 10:42 a.m., just minutes before the wedding began, a gray pickup truck had been recorded circling the block twice, then parking behind the church, right near the side door the shooter had used to escape. Morales froze when he saw the plate number. It belonged to Travis Miller. He drove out that same afternoon across the rural highways of Henderson County, past bare cornfields and rusting mailboxes until he reached an old trailer at the edge of the woods. The truck was there, dusty with mud caked along the tires, the same dent above the rear light visible in the footage. He knocked. No answer. Then again, louder. A voice came from inside, low and tired. "Who's asking?" "Detective Morales, Henderson Police. I just want to talk." The door opened a crack. The man who stood there looked older than his 40 years. Gaunt, unshaven, eyes sunken. A tattoo of a military cross faded on his arm. "Travis Miller?" The man nodded slowly. Morales explained why he was there, watching Miller's every reaction, but the veteran barely flinched. "I heard about Father Doyle," he said flatly. "It's tragic." "You knew him," Morales said. "Once," Travis replied. "A long time ago. He prayed while we bled." There was bitterness in his voice, the kind that never heals. Morales looked past him into the trailer. On a small shelf by the window sat something unexpected, a photograph of Father Raymond. The frame was cracked, and across it someone had drawn a thin red line, a scar across the priest's face. Next to it burned a candle. "You've been following the news," Morales said. "I watch everything," Travis muttered. "Sometimes heaven doesn't save good men. Sometimes it just watches." Morales noted every word, every twitch. He didn't arrest him. Not yet. But as he walked back to his car, he noticed something else through the window, a wooden rosary hanging from a nail, its beads half melted, as if once caught in fire. That night he couldn't sleep, because deep inside he knew this man wasn't finished talking, and neither, it seemed, was heaven. The next evening, Detective Morales returned to the trailer. This time he brought no backup, just a quiet determination that had been gnawing at him since he saw the Virgin statue glow in the candlelight. Travis Miller answered the door before Morales could knock. He looked different now, cleaner, calmer, as if he had expected this visit. A Bible lay open on the kitchen table, untouched but present. "Back again, Detective," he said, voice low. "I just want the truth," Morales replied. "You were there that morning. The cameras caught your truck." Travis sighed and sat down, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. He wasn't supposed to die. I only wanted to scare him, make him see what he did to us." Morales stared. "So you were there?" Travis nodded. "I stayed in the back pew." I couldn't look at him at first, but when I did, he looked right at me, like he already knew. His voice cracked. "He smiled, Detective. He actually smiled." Morales leaned forward. "And that's when you pulled the trigger?" Tears welled in the man's eyes. "No. I don't remember pulling anything. I heard a sound, a pop, and then silence, like something took over. When I opened my eyes, he was on the floor." The detective's mind spun. Either the man was lying, or something darker was at play. Back at St. Mark's that night, Morales stood again before the statue of Our Lady. The church was empty, only the faint hum of lights echoing through the nave. He whispered to himself, "If you're real, show me the truth." A breeze swept through the sanctuary, gentle, fragrant with roses. One candle flickered, then another, until the entire altar seemed to glow. And in that golden shimmer, Morales saw it, the reflection in the Virgin's eyes, faint but unmistakable. A man's face, broken with guilt, kneeling at the very back pew. The same pew where Travis had confessed to sitting. Morales dropped to one knee, his heart pounding. He couldn't explain it, couldn't photograph it, but he knew what he had seen. He whispered, trembling, "You're leading me to him, aren't you?" And somewhere in the silence, a single tear rolled down the marble cheek once more, falling exactly where the priest's body had lain. The funeral mass for Father Raymond Doyle drew more people than the little church had ever seen. Hundreds filled the pews, spilling out into the churchyard. Veterans in uniform, mothers holding children, even reporters stood in respectful silence. The choir sang softly, Ave Maria. The sound carried through the air like prayer itself. Detective Morales stood near the back, his badge hidden beneath his coat. Beside him, unseen by most, was Travis Miller, head bowed, face pale. Morales had convinced him to come, not in handcuffs, but as a man seeking peace. As the casket was brought forward, the sunlight outside dimmed. Clouds rolled in. Father Patrick, the visiting priest, lifted the chalice for the final blessing, when suddenly a gasp rippled through the congregation. All eyes turned to the altar. The statue of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Grace, was glistening again. This time, the tears were unmistakable. They fell in slow, shimmering drops down her marble cheeks, one by one, landing on the open Bible below, directly on a verse from the Gospel of Matthew, Forgive, and you will be forgiven. A murmur of awe and fear filled the air. Some people wept openly. Others dropped to their knees. And then a single voice rose from the crowd, hoarse, broken. "It's me!" Travis stepped forward, trembling. His hands shook as he clutched the pew for balance. "I was the one. I came to scare him. But the gun went off. I didn't mean to. God, I didn't mean to." He fell to his knees before the altar, sobbing. Morales reached for him but stopped. Something told him not to interfere. Travis looked up at the statue, his tears mixing with hers. "He told me to forgive," he whispered. "Even after everything, he told me to forgive." The crowd was silent, the moment stretched, sacred, raw, undeniable, and then, as if in response, the Virgin's final tear dropped, falling not on the Bible this time, but on Travis's shoulder. Witnesses would swear later that it shimmered like light before disappearing into his shirt. From that instant, the man who'd carried rage for 15 years finally let it go. He was taken away peacefully, head bowed, lips moving in prayer. And for Morales, watching through blurred eyes, there was no longer any doubt. Heaven itself had delivered the confession. The police van waited outside the church, its blue lights flashing softly against the gray sky. But no one hurried, no one shouted. The air around St. Mark's felt strangely calm, as if something unseen was still holding everyone in prayer. Travis Miller sat quietly on the steps, wrists unbound. Morales stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, Travis looked up. His face, once hardened by bitterness, now seemed lighter, like a man who had been carrying a stone in his chest for years and had just set it down. "She came to me last night," he whispered. Morales turned. "Who?" "The priest, Father Raymond. I saw him in my dream." Travis's eyes glistened. He was smiling, like he always did. He said, "You've already been forgiven, Travis. Now forgive yourself." And when I woke up, the room smelled like roses. Morales said nothing. He didn't need to. The scent of roses had become something sacred to him now, a sign of a presence he could no longer deny. Travis looked toward the statue visible through the open church door. "Do you think he'll take me back?" Morales nodded slowly. "He already has." Before being taken away, Travis made a final request, to receive Holy Communion. Father Patrick hesitated, then agreed. The entire congregation watched as the man who had once raised a gun now opened his hands to receive the body of Christ. Tears streamed down his face. When the ceremony ended, Morales remained alone in the pew. For the first time in years, he crossed himself, whispering words he thought he'd forgotten, "Hail Mary, full of grace." The words came haltingly at first, then steady, sincere. Because for Ethan Morales, faith was no longer a memory. It was alive again, reborn in the same place it had once died. Months passed. Spring returned to Kentucky, and with it, a quiet peace that slowly settled over St. Mark's Church. The blood had long been cleaned, the walls repainted, but one thing remained untouched, the statue of Our Lady of Grace. Her marble cheeks still bore the faint traces where tears had once fallen. Pilgrims came from across the state to kneel before her, soldiers, widows, families carrying candles and photographs. Some prayed for healing, others for forgiveness. And many said they could feel something there, a warmth that words couldn't explain. Detective Morales still visited every Sunday. He no longer came in uniform. He sat quietly in the back pew, right where the shooter had once stood, his head bowed, lips moving silently. When asked why he returned so often, he only said, "Because that's where I found what I'd lost." Travis Miller, now serving his sentence in a state facility, wrote to the parish every month. In one of his letters he said, "I used to believe vengeance proved strength. But in that church I learned that mercy is stronger. Father Raymond showed me that, and so did the mother who wept for him." Today a small plaque rests beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary. It reads, "In memory of Father Raymond Doyle, who died giving a blessing, and whose tears brought mercy to the guilty and faith to the lost." And as the narrator's voice fades, the final words echo gently through the air. Sometimes heaven reveals the truth, not with thunder or fire, but with a single tear from a mother's face. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to for more true stories of faith, mercy, and miracles that still happen in our world today.